Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's SEG webinar, which is titled Building a Safe, Inclusive, and Respectful Space. My name is Mary Pelletier. I am a project geologist at Goldspot Discoveries and an SEG volunteer for the Early Career Young Professionals Committee. And I will be your host for today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce you to my friend Susan Lomas, who is a professional geologist and the founder of the Me Too Mining Association. Susan has worked as an underground geologist and surface explorationist, and now focuses on geological modeling, resource estimation, and due diligence reviews. Her career has included working in remote sites all over the world, for junior exploration firms to operating mines, and she ultimately founded her own company, which is called Lionsgate Geological Consulting. On the screen, there is a QR code which will direct you to the Me Too Mining website in case you want to learn more about that. So now a bit of Zoom logistics information. Today's call will be listen only for participants, but we strongly encourage that you ask questions during the webinar using the Q&A button, which is in the control bar that should appear either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your setup. Today's webinar is broken into 3 portions. So the first one is where Susan Lomas, our presenter, will give her presentation, and there will be polls dispersed throughout. So keep an eye out for those polls. The second part of the webinar is a bit more interactive, where Susan will present 2 scenarios or case studies, and we will ask you, the participants, to write your answers or other questions in the Q&A again. We will then discuss those scenarios as a group. And after we go through the scenarios, the third part is where we open up the discussion and have just a general Q&A. So again, please feel free to ask questions. You can ask them anonymously, and we will do our best to answer those. Today's webinar is recorded, and an archive will be available following the event. If you missed one of the previous webinars hosted by the SEG, you can access the archive on our YouTube channel. This webinar is presented by the SEG Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which is now an official committee of the SEG. And for anyone who is interested in learning more about this new committee, or even better, if you want to take part and volunteer for the SEG, please send us an email at engage@segweb.org, or just visit the SEG website. There is also, if you want further hands-on experience or additional information on bystander intervention, Susan will also be hosting an event at this year's Whistler conference, which is hosted as in a hybrid format. So there will be an online portion and an in-person portion this coming September 2021. So again, look at the SEG website for further info. And that's it for me, Susan. So I'll pass it on to you for your presentation.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for hosting this event. Okay, let me. So thank you, everybody, for attending this seminar today. As Mireille said, we are going to be hosting our full course presentation at the SEG conference out of Whistler, and it's about 4 hours. So this is a very condensed version of that presentation, and I hope you get some useful information out of it. And so I just want to start with Me Too Mining was started to open this space and start a conversation about inappropriate behaviors in mining, mineral exploration, and mining impacted communities. And as more and more people shared their stories with me, I realized most of them ended with the phrase, "I did not know what to do." So I started searching, and I wanted to find practical solutions to empower everyone and address inappropriate workplace behaviors, such as sexual assault, sexual harassment, racism, bullying, intimidation, and discrimination. The types of behaviors that tend to grow in the dark, where there is no light provided by conversations, by opposition, or adequate prevention or reporting mechanisms. The solution to a lot of these inappropriate behaviors often relate back to committed leadership and management, positive and actionable workplace and institutional cultures with effective policies and procedures. Things that are just too big for one person to realize at their workplace or learning institute. But then I started finding studies that showed bystander intervention strategies were having a positive impact on college and university spaces. So why not bring these tools to mining and mineral exploration so everyone knows what to do when bad things happen to them or in their presence? And with the help of our Vice President, Julia Gartley, we developed a Digger program. So this talk is about building, supporting safe, inclusive, and respectful workplaces, which include, spaces, but this includes workplaces, academic spaces, conferences, speaking events, and field trips with allyship and active bystander strategies. Our hope is that you find tools to empower you to step out of silence and step into action. And I really like to mention this because I've had a lot of comments about, changing our association's name, but Me Too Mining is because the Me Too movement is not about celebrity or the fickle focus of the media. It's about women, men, and that beautiful spectrum in between, finding space to talk about difficult and traumatic experiences, healing and sharing burdens, finding resources, finding community, changing cultures, and preventing harm, and just moving our lives forward. So I am going to provide a little bit of a content warning, whereas this talk occasionally uses the phrases sexual assault and discusses sexual harassment. I am a survivor of sexualized violence, and I know the impact that these words can have when they're used repeatedly in a short amount of time. And it can feel like a jackhammer on your soul, your heart, and your brain. So if you need to leave at any point during this talk, I encourage you to do so and do what it is and do what you need to do to care and comfort for yourself. And I ask you to always remember that we can all play a role towards safe, inclusive, and respectful workplaces. And this is a big and important but. The harasser is always the one responsible for their behavior. It's not the target, and it's not the bystanders. Because in these roles, we do tend to blame ourselves for not reacting, for overreacting, for underreacting, for freezing or fleeing, and second guessing our reactions, and ultimately taking on partial or even most of the responsibility for what happened. And we need to take a step back, take a deep breath, and remember, it is the harasser who has the sole responsibility for their behavior. So we're going to put up our first question. We can have 6 of them today. And it's just a reminder that polls are anonymous and you are under no obligation to answer any of them if you do not feel comfortable in doing so. So this first question is, have you been in a situation where you wished you had intervened when a peer was experiencing a form of harassment? And I am going to answer that also. And we'll give you time to provide your answers, and we'll await the results for that. It can be a really difficult situation. I've heard from geologists telling me stories about 30 years ago, they observed something happening in a camp that they were in, and they still carried it with them, and they still felt bad, and it haunted them. So it's really important to forgive yourself. Remember that those times can be challenging, and most people don't know what to do all the time. So you have to let it go, educate yourself, and move forward into action and bring these experiences with you, but don't let them happen again. That's all. So 67% of everybody here have felt that regret, have observed something happening. So let's see if we can do something about that. So at the end of this talk, we're going to run through a couple of scenarios and analyze the impacts and consider digger actions to intervene safely and appropriately. And I recommend that you grab a notebook and make it your safe, inclusive, and respectful space toolkit. Use it to write down anything that you hear today that resonates with you or that you feel an action aligns with your strengths or values. Do your own research on actions and build a toolkit that works for you. You can also use this book to record the details of incidents that happen to you or that you observe happening around you. So let's run through one of our scenarios right at the start so we can keep it in mind as we step through this presentation. And I'm just going to read it for you. And you're in a study, a work team with several other people. And this could be in the field, an academic setting, or an office. And one of the team members, Taylor, often makes sexual jokes and suggestive comments and often targets Sam. You and the other workers find the jokes annoying, but have not yet said anything. And most of the time, Sam doesn't appear to react to the behavior, but you notice that Sam starts to avoid working with the team and being social with everybody. So it's a pretty common scenario. I think we've all had this happen to us. So just keep it in mind as we go through the slides. So I have been a geologist in the mining industry for over 30 years. And when I started in 1987, most of my work involved mapping and sampling, walking grid lines, collecting rock samples, loading them into my backpack. And as the day progressed, of course, that backpack would get heavier and heavier. And at the end of the day, I could sit down and empty it and start again the next morning. And in 2014, I started what became a 3-year journey of recovery from PTSD. What I discovered in that journey was that I had to work really hard to empty a backpack, a different kind of backpack. This was a backpack I carried for most of my life and contained childhood traumas. It was where I dumped a boulder after my sexual assault and then tossed in all my experiences of sexual harassment, discrimination, intimidation, threats, all kinds of inappropriate behaviors and microaggressions, and even a lot of those pesky little jokes that we experience. Experiences that I could not always deal with at the time, and I wanted to keep moving forward and to keep learning and advance my career. So I would to my backpack. We all do this to some extent, of course. We fill our backpacks with our traumas and negative experiences, and it just keeps getting heavier, and it can become hard to move after a while. But then there are days that we don't really feel the weight of it, or if it's a really great day, we even forget that it's there. But then something happens, and we add to it unexpectedly, and we feel the weight of it again. And so remember, when you believe someone is maybe being overly sensitive or overreacting to something that you perceive was pretty minor, you have no idea how heavy their backpack is already, or that they were just reminded that they have to carry one. So here we have our second question. And now that I've told you a little bit about myself, it's your turn. And again, you don't have to answer these questions if you feel uncomfortable, but it just gets a sense of letting us know who we're talking to today. So I'm going to fill it out myself. And we'll find out who's in our audience today, and maybe gear the discussion a little bit towards the majority of the audience. Let's see, once we get those results. Oh, here we go. We are 64% identifying as female and 31% identifying as male. Most people are from industry, and that's really interesting. We've got some postgraduate and professors. That's really great to see. Thank you all for joining. Okay, so let's run through some definitions, and so we have a common understanding of these terms and that are used throughout this presentation. So sexual harassment typically includes words, gestures, graphics, behaviors, or physical contact. It is unwelcomed by the person targeted. It usually occurs repeatedly, but it can be one serious incident, and it is likely to cause offense or humiliation, and it could place a condition of a sexual nature on employment, training opportunities, and even promotions. And so here is the big question of the today's seminar coming up. And it's, have you experienced sexual harassment in the workplace or academia? You have several options. You can also say both and other environments, or maybe you haven't experienced it at all, and that's wonderful. And so I'm going to fill that out myself. Of course, you can't fill out more than one. Okay. Often this is the reason that a lot of people come to these talks, because they want to know what to do if they've experienced these or even observed them happening. So I hope today we can provide you some guidance and give you some empowerment to move forward and be able to step in if you see something that where somebody's being harmed or impacted by these kinds of behaviors. And so 30%, of course, in the workplace, some in school settings, and of course, many in both, also 30%. And I'm really happy to see that 30% of you haven't experienced these behaviors. That's wonderful. So just a quick touch into what sexual assault is. And in most jurisdictions, sexual assault is considered physical contact of a sexual nature that is not consented to. And keep in mind that the nature of the contact or the impact on the target is key to the determination of sexual assault over sexual harassment. Or in some circumstances, of course, a single incident can be both. And for example, if a manager were to make suggestive comments and jokes to an administrative assistant and then forcibly kiss and grope them without their consent, this is an example of both sexual harassment and sexual assault. And they often do work together or escalate one to the other. And consent is such an important word these days, and it's imperative that everyone understand what it is. And consent means voluntary agreement to engage in the activity in question. It must be granted without the influence of force, threats, coercion, fear, fraud, drugs, excessive alcohol, or abuse of authority. And consent can be withdrawn at any time, where a person has the right to change their mind and does not have to provide justification or explanation. So when these inappropriate behaviors happen in the workplace, there's a whole ripple effect and a whole bunch of impacts that happen around the incident. And the impact of inappropriate behaviors on the target, of course, can increase with the intensity or the nature and the duration of the harassment. And it can really just begin with annoyance and embarrassment, shame, humiliation, anger that this is happening to them. This can deepen into loss of trust. They don't feel safe, increased absenteeism, lower productivity because you're distracted, because you're aggravated, and loss of promotions because you are so distracted, which can all contribute to financial distress and increased stress and anxiety. Financial distress has been shown in studies to mostly impact the targeted person as they leave the job, have to search for new work, and there's a period of unemployment in there. That financial distress is very serious, and it happens predominantly to women. More serious outcomes include depression, anxiety disorders, and of course, PTSD. And in the most violent forms, physical injury and even death, of course. The impact on coworkers and bystanders, they can also feel less trusting and feel unsafe in the workplace. How can this behavior be happening? How can nobody be doing anything about it? They can feel ineffective and powerless to stop someone being harmed. They may feel stressed that they didn't intervene and carry that stress with them. And workers in the workforce can become divided as people pick sides and becomes distracting and may carry concern for the target. And it just impacts everybody. And on the workplace, there, of course, can be a decline in morale, a decrease in productivity, an increase in worker turnover, errors and injuries, and an increase in costs related to investigations, arbitrations, and liability. And just like any safety infraction, the possible outcomes for the harasser should be commensurate to the offense. So possible outcomes could include just a simple apology, just acknowledgement that something happened, and an apology. It could go just to mediation, training, and counseling. They could be suspended, demoted, transferred, or in the most serious circumstances, terminated. What we don't want to see continue is that nothing happens or that it is the target that pays the brunt of the consequences. We have our fourth question, 2 more to go after this one. And this question has to be, have you been in a work or academic space where you felt that inappropriate behaviors were supported by the workplace culture? And I'm going to answer that one and just share a quick story about a consulting company that I was talking to, and they had an incident happen in another country with a worker that they had sent down there, and she reported to them that she had been sexually harassed in the workplace, and their management team sat down. What are we going to do about this? Well, we should pull her out. Who are we going to send down there? Well, it should be a man. And they contacted her and let her know what their path forward was going to be. And she stood up and she stood her ground and she said, no, I am not the one that should be pulled out of this job. I am doing my job here and I am working hard. I want you to do something about this. And that was a real wake-up call for the company to rethink their strategies on these situations. And it was a real important story for me to hear that she was absolutely right. She wasn't the one that had done anything wrong, and she shouldn't be the one to be pulled out of that situation. And the situation just needed to be dealt with properly with the consultants company and with the host company. So let's see. Wow, there's a lot of workplaces out there that people feel these behaviors are supported by the culture that they're in, and we need to change these workplace cultures. Okay, so here we're going to talk about allyship. And I read an article in the Harvard Business Review, and it was a really all-encompassing article. It's just one of those great articles that answered so many questions. And it was called Be a Better Ally. And they stated, and I quote, "For too long, leaders from majority groups have helped preserve the status quo, which favors them by relegating diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts to human resources or, those committees, instead of using their own power to effect change. It is not sufficient," unquote. So it is not sufficient to divert responsibility for inclusion and diversity to others and be satisfied that it's being taken care of. It is up to everyone, but especially those who are not part of an underrepresented group, to be a workplace ally. Effective allies educate themselves and then listen with respect. They build trust with their coworkers, advocate, step towards actions, build a community of allies to strengthen and uplift others. Change starts with individual leaders taking responsibility for their own attitudes and behaviors. So this education piece is really about understanding your privilege and educate yourself. Acquiring self-awareness and gratitude for one's own privilege, advantages, resources, and power is the first step towards allyship, so that one can honestly make space for others who may experience obstacles and barriers. When preparing to become an ally, do your own homework. First, an ally takes the time to read, to listen, to watch, and deepen their understanding first. Listen to your coworkers, observe your workspace, pay attention in meetings to who gets to speak, who gets interrupted, and who gets to take or is given credit for ideas. There are plenty of publications, websites, podcasts, and social media channels about underrepresented groups of people. And after this initial phase of research, an ally should ask a worker's permission to ask questions about their experiences. And only if the answer is yes, proceed. It is not up to the underrepresented group to educate an ally. The ally has to make that research and then ask with compassion whether this person is willing to answer your questions. And you can ask questions like, I'm curious about the things in this organization that you find challenging, that I might not notice. Would you feel comfortable sharing some of these experiences with me? Can you name one thing that you wish your colleagues would do more of to improve your experiences? And also, can you name maybe if one or two things that you wish they would stop doing? So these kinds of questions aren't putting that person on the spot, demanding that they tell you their life or their work stories. You're asking them what you can do, what your company can do, what your coworkers can do, and what you can stop doing. Build trust and listen. Let colleagues know they can confide in you about the inappropriate workplace behaviors they encounter. Listen generously, empathize with them, and validate their experiences. Create a safe space for members of underrepresented groups to express their fears, frustrations, and needs. And simply listening to their stories and trusting that they're being truthful creates that layer of support that they need. Allies need to support talented workers from entirely different racial, gender, or cultural backgrounds. Do not stick with what you know. Reach out beyond your comfort levels. You should get to know them, help them develop leadership skills, challenge and encourage them, and tout their abilities and achievements for their projects, stretch assignments, and promotions. Share their career goals with influencers. Allies work to ensure that marginalized voices are both heard and respected and are represented within communication. Amplify when someone proposes a good idea, repeat it, and give them credit. Allies should drive systemic workplace changes to policies, practices, and culture. An underrepresented person can often be the only in the room or meeting, so make a real effort to diversify the meeting. And if that is not possible, then make sure the only has opportunities to speak and is invited to contribute. After the meeting, hold space for a company or institutional conversation about increasing diversity, so there are no more onlys. And actions can also be done in more public venues, such as conferences. Champion willingly defer to colleagues from underrepresented groups in meetings and invisible industry-wide events and conferences. Direct questions about specific or technical topics to employees or students with expertise instead of answering them yourself. Advocate for members of underrepresented groups as keynote speakers and panelists. And build a community of allies. Join or form a group of colleagues or industry leaders that are like-minded people that you can share your experiences in allyship with and listen to their experiences. Everyone can listen more and learn more and take actions to be an ally for your coworkers or students, just your cohorts. So male allies, where mining is classified as a male-dominated industry because people who identify as male can be over 75% of the workforce. So to effectively change the workplace culture in a male-dominated industry, we need to increase male allyship. And I want to be really clear here that the majority of male workers in mining are respectful and do support their co-workers. They want everyone to be physically and mentally safe while they are at work. But what we really need is for this majority to step up and step out of their comfort zones and become male allies. But there is a problem. Studies show that men do not experience the workplace the same as women workers do. They are often not exposed to the inappropriate behaviors happening around them. A really interesting 2019 study of corporations in the US found that 42% of women reported some sort of gender discrimination in their workplace, while 85% of the men in the same companies didn't perceive a problem with gender discrimination. And 38% of women reported being sexually harassed in the workplace, while 77% of the men reported that sexual harassment was not a problem at their company. So clearly this study shows that there is a disconnect between the perceptions on inclusion and inappropriate behaviors in the work and workplace safety by men and the lived experiences of women. It's important to remember that just because you're not seeing inappropriate behaviors, you cannot assume that they are not happening to your coworkers. And I want to add a little piece here about female allies, because we are so important, especially in male-dominated industries. More senior women in male-dominated industries tend to have accumulated many layers of armor over the years. We have moved our careers forward, found ways through, over, and around obstacles, and sometimes we forget it should not have been so hard. We should build better paths for the next generation and should not dismiss their complaints because we had no one to complain to. We should not dismiss their pain because we denied our own. And to change the workplace culture, we need to help the younger generation navigate their challenges, report their experiences of all forms of harassment, and talk with male colleagues about the challenges that we have had to overcome. We need to remove our armor, and we need to be our authentic selves at work, support each other, and ensure that we all move forward together. So our second to last question is, have you been in a situation, well, I'll let it pop up first. Have you been in a situation where an ally stepped in and supported, promoted, or advocated for you? Answer that one. And, you know, I've got to say, I've benefited from a few really powerful and really incredibly good allies through my career, and I will forever remember and be grateful to them for encouraging me and lifting me up when I didn't feel so strong sometimes. So it's a powerful tool, and sometimes you don't realize the impact that you're having on people around you just by being a good leader and being a good ally. So think about the allies that you've had and try and be that ally for somebody that's working around you, or that you see. Sometimes at conferences or meetings, I'll see somebody standing alone, particularly say a student, and they don't know anybody and they're fairly maybe intimidated by the group that's there. And I'll make a point of trying to go up to them and introducing myself. I'm trying to do that at least twice in each of these gatherings. And once I talk to them and I can think of maybe somebody in the room to introduce them to, I do that. And that includes them and makes them feel much less isolated than maybe they're feeling. So next time you're in one of these rooms, look around, find that person that's standing alone, and pull them in. So we should get those results. So 61% have had that ally in their life or in their career, and I think we can do better. I think we can make that a much higher number if we all try a little bit harder. So now we get to the bystander intervention part of this talk, and it always, of course, starts with a person that notices a problem. And as with everything we do in mining, we need to assess the safety of the environment and the situation. An active bystander's first priority is to ensure that they are safe, and then to assess if the targeted person is safe. And once the safety of the situation has been assessed, the bystander can go down the digger list to the action that matches the level of threat in any situation, matches how they're feeling that day, how strong they're feeling, just, you know, what's going to be appropriate for them. And you can always get more details on this digger program from our website. I think we have a very thorough discussion or presentation on that at metoomining.com. And you'll find a list of references of resources and lots of other different types of information there. But let's go through each of them in a bit more detail. So with low levels of threat, you're feeling strong that day, a bystander can use direct actions and just simply say something. Sometimes it's important to check in with the conversation first. Maybe you misheard something. And if you're not sure of an issue, if there is an issue, you can say, hey, what are you guys talking about? If there is an inappropriate comment or behavior, then you can use bold and direct statements that address the behavior, but do not attack the harasser. That's not funny. It's not okay. That is inappropriate. Leave me alone, her alone, him alone, leave them alone. Do not say that to me. Don't say that to her. Don't say that to him, and don't say that to them. Don't touch me. Don't touch her. Don't touch him, or don't touch them. And back away from me right now. And part of the most important part of using these phrases is finding the ones that work for you, writing them down, put them on a sticky note beside the mirror in the bathroom or something, and then practice saying them repeatedly, quietly, loudly, so that then they come more naturally when you need them. Indirect actions. If it's not safe to step in and speak up, then a bystander could use indirect actions and interrupt, distract, or disrupt a situation. Break it up, provide opportunities for change within the atmosphere that's there. These actions are to change the focus and to provide the target the opportunity to remove themselves from the scene. Interrupt by changing the subject or asking an unrelated question. Did you see that movie that everybody's talking about right now? What time is the meeting today? I think there's a phone call for you, or I think I heard you getting called on the radio. Anything to just snap the situation. Give some distraction. Disrupt. If you know the target, or even if you know the harasser, walk away with them. Just pull them right out of what's going on. And distract. You can drop something, drop a book, spill your water, spill your coffee. That's a really great distraction because everybody turns and looks and it just breaks up what's happening. If safety is a concern and you feel at risk, if you act alone, you can get a coworker or activate other bystanders around you. You could say something like, "Are you okay with this? I think we should do something here." If you are the target, you can talk to your coworkers and ask for their support. Tell them what's happening. Tell them of your experience and ask for their help in documenting and supporting you when these things happen. And studies on the bystander effect tell us it can be difficult for bystanders to step in, especially when they're part of a crowd. And one way to break a bystander's hesitancy is to single out one person, directly speak to them. You with the blue shirt, you with the green jacket, can you come here and help me? That tends to pull them into the event, and it breaks their resistance. If you are concerned for the safety or for someone else's, for your safety or for someone else's, then get the help of an authority. Call security, call a supervisor or a manager. If there's a safety officer, call them in. And if there's none of these around, call 911 or whatever your number is for your local authority. And this is one of the most important and impactful actions a bystander can take. And that is to engage and talk to the targeted person after an incident. Simply asking, "Are you okay?" It can just dissipate so much of the emotion, of the fear, of the embarrassment that they're feeling. You could even say things like, "I don't really know what to say, but I'm really sorry that just happened to you. I saw what happened. Is there anything I can do to help?" And always finish it with, "I'm going to send you an email with a summary of what I saw." Document it for them. Their first reaction is going to be to downplay and try and discredit, disregard what just happened to them. So it's important to give them that perspective from outside of themselves of what just happened to them. And sometimes the target just needs time to process what happened, or talk to their family or close friends, or they may just want to be alone. So let them know you are available to talk to them and about what just happened. And if they want, and check in with them later, maybe the next day, maybe a few days later. And it's really, really, and I mean really important to keep a record of all incidents that are experienced or witnessed, because documentation is what supports the reporting process. It provides evidence of escalation. So sometimes even it's a really small thing, write it down, because these things can build. And it amasses a record of events that is not easy to dismiss or discount, because they're going to try and say, "Well, that didn't really happen. It wasn't really that bad." No, I've got it written down. This is what happened. This is what was said, over and over and over again. So keep this notebook. Keep an e-document on your personal computer. Send an email using your personal email account, or text yourself. And record important information such as the names of the harasser, the target, anybody that was around, any authority or management that you talked to, the date and time, location of the incident, detailed description of what happened and what was said and done, and document any contact that was made. Attach copies of electronic communications, record all voicemails, photograph any graphic images, and record all emotional and physical reactions to what happened. And find an outlet to report what has happened. Some of these reporting options are for Canadian entities, but we are trying to amass a greater record on our website for other countries. If you want to take that on and record, send us a lot of resources that are based in your country outside of Canada, we would love to build our resources page for other countries. But it is really most important to file a report with your company, institution, or association. Research shows that 75% of sexual harassment incidents are not reported, and companies are claiming that they have no issue. This is not an important event for their companies. And studies also show that it can be a futile and even risky action for the target to take, and we acknowledge that. So other options for reporting an incident also include, of course, if you're a member of a union, file a complaint with your union. Seek legal counsel. There are a lot of employment lawyers and law firms out there that will provide you advice and free hours, and there are beginning to be legal entities. There's one in BC here that will provide up to 5 hours of legal support for free for a sexual harassment incident in the workplace. Report to a workman's compensation board. File a complaint with the appropriate professional association if that person is a registered member. There are codes of conduct within these associations. And file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. It is the longest and most arduous process to go through, apparently, and is rife with unfortunate outcomes. But it is important. We do need to increase these reporting events. And this is our last question before we head into the scenario now, and I'll wait for that to pop up again. And I'm always just curious, after you hear these presentations or these actions, do you feel more empowered to intervene if you experience or even if you witness these inappropriate behaviors? And don't feel bad if you don't. Everybody feels differently on different days. You can feel strong, you can feel impacted by what you just saw, and you can freeze yourself as a bystander. So gentleness with yourself is incredibly important in these. And the biggest thing that you can do, like I said, is to go talk to the person that event just happened to and ask them if they're okay and check in with them. That can be the most impactful thing that you can do. And even if it's a little while later, when you feel more recovered and more strengthened yourself, just go talk to that person. So let's see what, that's really awesome. I'm really pleased to see that. And that's really impactful for me to see that this does have an impact on people. All right. So we're going to go back to, I'm going to try open up the chat screen on my screen too. A question and answer one. And I'm going to read that scenario again, and let's go through and have a discussion about it now. So you are in a study or work team with several other people, and this could be in the field, an academic setting, or an office. And one of the team members, Taylor, often makes sexual jokes or suggestive comments and often targets Sam. You and the other team members find the jokes annoying, but you haven't said anything yet. And most of the time, Sam does not appear to react to the behavior, but you notice Sam is starting to avoid working with the team. And don't judge an incident by the target's reaction, because sometimes they don't want to show that it's impacted them, and they don't have a strong reaction within that moment. It can reverberate within them quietly, but it's still inside. So first, we can talk about the impacts of this behavior and consider what could be the impacts on Sam, on Taylor, and of course the rest of the team. And maybe as we're chatting about that, what I'll do is I'll keep the scenario up on the screen, and then I have a slide with some suggestions, and everybody's going to have hopefully some interesting ones.
Hi, everyone. So just a cue that to discuss this scenario, we encourage you to use the Q&A panel. So we already have some questions from Susan's wonderful presentation, which we will address after the scenarios are run. And for now, if you can please write down your comments and your thoughts on this scenario in the Q&A, and we'll discuss those shortly.
And maybe just start your comment or your question with like scenario 1 impacts. And then, like I said, I think this is a common enough kind of scenario. I think most people have witnessed or experiences jokes or comments that can happen in meetings or in groups or in teams. And they can be pretty off-putting. They can be pretty impactful on some people. They can be pretty triggering to some people. What about you, Mireille? Can you think of?
Yes, of course. I mean, I feel like this one is a common one, which at the same time doesn't necessarily mean that we know how to deal with it. And you're absolutely right in the fact that everyone reacts to these things differently, and it's not because Sam doesn't show like he or she is reacting that it doesn't hurt or triggers emotional response on his or her end. My gut feeling would be to privately and gently just reach out to Sam and ask him or her how they're doing, and not necessarily in front of everyone.
Absolutely. Taking that private moment with them. Are you okay? Checking in. You know, there was another one of those jokes. I've started noticing them, and they seem to be often targeted at you. Mm-hmm. And just acknowledging that and giving them that support is pretty incredible.
Yeah, we're starting to have responses here. The Q&A is working. So most of the people here are responding as anonymous attendees, which is absolutely fine. So I'm just going to label anonymous. So there's an anonymous attendee here saying that maybe it's time to interrupt and tell Taylor that I feel very uncomfortable with you making comments like that in the workplace. And when attendee David mentions that since people in the group seem annoyed, it is time to express that annoyance because we are past that threshold. Alberto Reyes mentions that this is an interesting point. So the impact and the likely response to this situation depends on the dynamic between Taylor and the rest of the team, and if there's a power play or if there's any kind of hierarchical situation.
Yeah, and I specifically left that blank within this scenario because, you know, sometimes that power dynamic is there, and sometimes it can be a pretty flat team. It can be one person that maybe runs it a little bit stronger than the rest, and yeah, maybe in this case Taylor is sort of a bit more of a leader within the group. That's why the team's a little more hesitant to talk to them, or just maybe a very forceful personality and intimidate the rest of the team, or isn't. But that's their way of coping with being uncomfortable within this scenario, is to keep making these jokes. And sometimes they don't realize that that's how they're filling space in quiet moments, is with things that are inappropriate. So there's all sorts of ways that this scenario pops up and happens. And so let me go to the slide of some of the impacts that we have. So yeah, Sam could worry that other people think that this behavior is okay. Their job performance or their team performance could suffer because they could just be replaying those jokes in their head while they're sitting there trying to listen to what the rest of the team is saying. Taylor certainly could be distracting everybody from their work or the work of the team. And if Taylor continues this behavior in other workplaces, it impacts it ripples out with them and it impacts more people.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of sorry, I'm not addressing every single answer, but there's a common theme in people identifying a potential pattern for disaster where, you know, because the victim is not voicing out, it empowers the harasser and at the same time disintegrates the sense of team. And so I personally am happy to see that a lot of people are thinking about the whole team and also down the line, what is going to happen if this repeats itself. So that's a common theme in the attendees' responses.
Okay, so now we can go through the digger actions. And again, I'm going to put up the scenario. And the first one, maybe we just want to deal with, are what are some of the direct actions that we could take within this scenario? Who would we talk to that is within this team? And what could we say to them? There's always the direct in the moment talks that we can do and the later talks that can happen. So yeah, there's a anonymous attendee that says, interrupt Taylor and ask to keep the work environment professional, and that comments like that are inappropriate. And follow up with in private with Sam if they are okay. And that's great. You've just put it right out there on the table, right there in front of everybody. It's been said. And so it's important to go back and write that down. This date, another joke. Taylor was told to stop.
There's also another intervention suggested to Taylor, just speaking out and saying, I don't think that was okay. And also reaching out to your potential allies, to the team, and do you think that comment, and asking them if they think that comment was appropriate. One of my questions is, if you are someone like Sam who internalizes things naturally, how likely do you think it is that Sam will step up and address the group?
Probably unlikely. And that's why that outreach of talking to Sam and saying, and encouraging them, absolutely. That is part of being a good ally, is saying over time, building up their courage to say and stand up for themselves. That's not funny. I don't find those jokes funny. Those jokes make me feel uncomfortable. And so as the bystander, you can become the ally and work with Sam so that they can start to stand up for themselves. I do know of a workplace where they use red cards, yellow cards, green cards. And, someone does make a comment and everybody's got them and they just sort of quietly wave a yellow card or a red card. And I thought that was a brilliant idea as a nonverbal way of communicating discomfort for something that was said.
Yeah, and that touches on some of the comments where people are talking about policy and resources that should be put in place in workplace or reviewed at safety meetings. Not something that you sign when you get hired and then forget all about it. But yeah, something that we keep in our pocket, literally, like those cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always got to be an ongoing discussion. And it can't just be that, okay, yeah, I promise at the beginning.
Yeah. That's great, Susan. I'm seeing we just crossed the hour mark. So I will leave it up to you, but just so you know, there are maybe a dozen questions so far that are on the overall, addressed to the overall Q&A session. So
okay. We can
let me know.
We can start. Yeah, we'll go through this scenario maybe a little more quickly, and then we can maybe we want to leave the last half hour for those questions, or 45 minutes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions which are going back and forth, addressing the different topics that were discussed during the presentation. So
okay, so
again,
maybe
more up to you, but I think we could answer the general questions.
Okay, maybe we can finish this scenario, go to the questions, and then we can do the next scenario as we have time.
Okay.
Okay, so some of the direct actions I suggest would be immediately tell Taylor to stop. Their jokes and comments are inappropriate and they're distracting everybody, as a lot of the attendees had written. And maybe pull Taylor aside outside of the meetings and tell them and say something like, you probably think you're being funny, but these jokes are not appropriate and they're making everybody really uncomfortable. It'd be really good for you to stop. So we get quick indirect actions that people can think of.
I think we got answers that are a mishmash of all the Digger letters. I think maybe if you just go through the slides, because there's a lot of overlap between what you're proposing and what the audience has answered.
Okay, so indirect actions. Just, don't laugh at the joke. An awkward silence can speak volumes and can really message to the person that that's not appropriate. If nobody feels strong enough, maybe they are a person of power, you kind of want to make them feel uncomfortable. Interrupt Taylor when they're making these comments and jokes and change the subject. Just jump right in with something completely different in the middle of, what's coming. It's a repeat behavior. Keep interrupting them. Keep breaking it up. These are pretty indirect actions. Of course, in terms of get a coworker, you could talk to the rest of the team and ask them if they're okay with these jokes. Are we okay with this? Tell them you notice that that everybody's kind of getting distracted by them. Ask for their help to talk to Taylor. If everybody makes comments to Taylor that that's not okay, it can change the dynamic and make it stop. Talk to the supervisor outside of the team and suggest that they come in and discuss appropriate workplace conduct and behaviors with the team. and report Taylor's behavior to a supervisor and ask them to talk to Taylor directly so they understand that their behavior is not okay and it is distracting everybody. Of course, as we said, check in with Sam. Tell them you noticed that they appear to be becoming more uncomfortable with Taylor's jokes and comments. Ask if they're okay. Ask if there's something that you or the team can do to help them. Maybe Sam's got some things that they know can be done to help them. And of course, keep a record of all these jokes. How often are they happening in these meetings? Are they happening in every one? Are they happening 10, 20, 100 times every meeting? Is it just so overwhelming? Write down some of the comments, the date, the time that they happened, and especially if they continue after Taylor was told to stop. If the jokes keep continuing after that, then of course, talk to the supervisor and file a report if there is an entity or a vehicle for doing that. So at this point we have scenario 2, but as you mentioned that there are maybe some pretty interesting questions for discussion and about the actual talk. So maybe let's visit some of those and see how long that goes for.
Yes, again, thank you on behalf of a lot of people that dropped thank yous on the chat and myself and the other organizers. Thank you for your courage and your bravery to share your story and also use these hardships and to better educate our community and make us all better employees. My strategy here, I also recognize and thank everyone who participated and asked questions. I have around 50 questions on my window right now, which is amazing, but unfortunately comes with the downside of not being able to answer all of those. For the sake of conciseness, I will focus on the handful of questions that we have that are very specific, where anonymous attendees are reaching out and trying to find an answer to a problem they are dealing with right now. So let's start with the first one. So anonymous attendee is asking, how do you navigate the issue of terminating an employee for inappropriate conduct, but not being able to act as a reference for that person for future employment opportunities? If you are going to give a negative review or say a person was terminated for sexual harassment, you aren't allowed to act as that person's reference. How do you therefore prevent that person from being able to take a job at a new site and continue to sexually harass or assault minority groups?
That is a really challenging situation. And, you know, I'm going to say to a lot of these specifically directed questions too, is sometimes there are no one answer or great answers, of course, to a lot of these situations. And this is a really problematic one. I certainly know of a lot of workers in the mining industry that have serial behaviors and they keep getting job after job, long-term employees with consulting groups specifically. So it is a difficult situation to deal with. And, you know, you have to be true to yourself and what you believe. Is this person a good fit for that company or any company? And if the answer is no, then no, you just say, I can't provide a reference for this person. I'm sorry. And you can explain, or you don't have to explain. You may not be legally able to explain. But if you are uncomfortable giving that reference, you do not have to give that reference. Certainly, I know there's all sorts of networks out there of discussions and groups that talk. We know everybody knows a lot of people in the industry. It's not a big industry, and it's dangerous for, you know, having these rumor networks that go around, but sometimes they speak a lot of powerful truths, and it's important to listen to them. But take some of the things that you hear, you know, cautiously. That's all.
Thanks, Susan. That's a And thank you for the anonymous attendee for raising that question. I have a question from Catherine Cameron, who is saying that she is starting a new job and, quote, "My role will include mentoring young women who have just graduated. I want them to see this content, what you're presenting, Susan, but not get the idea that they need to be constantly vigilant and afraid of the nature of the industry. What would be a good way to preface my suggestion for viewing this content?"
As I prefaced in one of the slides, and I do try and mention this, is that I think the majority of workers in this industry are great and wonderful human beings, and they work towards the benefit of everyone. But as with any social or educational setting that we've all probably dealt with, there are those individuals that can have a huge impact and a huge footprint on the workspaces, the study spaces that we can be in. And so it's in this activation of the majority that we can lessen the impact of these people and show them it's not okay. We are shining a light on your behavior. So I think it's, you know, these things can happen. They do happen. We want to work together so that they don't continue to happen and that you don't have these experiences. But it's really important to be able to say, I know what to do, as opposed to this happened to me and I didn't know what to do. So I think taking a lot of that sense of we need to build this community up. These things can happen, they do happen, but we're working really hard to stop it and to empower everybody around this person that's just coming into the industry. But they need to know what to do, and we need to be honest with them.
Good. There's a second part to Catherine's comment, and which I think is also a good question. She's saying, I am in the middle of the chain of command, so not at the bottom, not at the top. Susan, do you have any advice on how someone in Catherine's position, aka middle, can make a suggestion or take action so that everyone in her team views these issues as part of health and safety?
That's an interesting question. It just really involves, I think, for me, being observant and being open, you know, being this ally of knowing what's going on around you by, you know, being open and observing, and also having that space that people feel comfortable talking to you and telling them what they're experiencing. And I would hope as a middle person that you have somebody above you that you can go to and say what your experiences are, and ask for more training on this, because everybody that's here today and garners this information, you can go back to your work environment. But if you're the only person that now has these skills or has that new empathy for what's going on around them, it can be difficult to maintain that empowerment and that strength. But if you bring in, say, a talk like this to a workplace and everybody gets the same level of information, then everybody feels more supported. And people below you and people above you know that they need to be open to have you go to them and talk to them about the situations that you're observing or experiencing.
Thanks, Susan. I have a more technical question, I want to say, from, I think, an anonymous attendee who is mentioning that many industry members of our community are part of ethic committees within their respective professional organizations, citing EGBC and other associations. Talking to the company, to your company itself, can potentially only increase the negative behavior. Is there an independent committee within EGBC or other organizations that you know where potential victims or bystanders can voice out their concerns?
Most of these professional associations, like EGBC, have reporting mechanisms. You report, there are codes of conduct, there are norms to behavior, and if those lines are crossed, you can file a report, a complaint. And often, sometimes these things just go to mediation. Someone goes, talks to that person, tells them to stop. You may not even know that that's happened. I'm very encouraged by EGBC that they did take on a case last year where a professionally registered engineer behaved inappropriately with another association, architectural association. It's on their website. You can read about the case. And he was using sort of the registered term architect. And he was advised by them to stop. And he very maliciously attacked the person that wrote the letter, the woman that wrote the letter, and made very sexually inappropriate comments to her. And the association ultimately took his license away for unprofessional conduct. And I think this is a venue that we need to consider, because it was a real shock to me to really realize that it was an employment lawyer that said, well, you should also file complaints with your professional association, because that is inappropriate behavior for a professional within a professional setting. So again, the more complaints that are filed with these associations, and if you're on a committee and it happens, absolutely file the complaint, document the behavior, write it down. And if it's repeated and repeated, especially once you've got a record of escalating or repeated events, file a complaint.
Yes, that's really important. And expanding a bit on this question from another anonymous attendee who's just mentioning that reporting or discussing incidents with an employer can lead to an increase in harassment or even loss of employment. Publicly discussing these experiences can lead to being labeled or ignored. And so how can we as individuals can discuss these experiences and help educate others without leading to isolation or negative consequences?
Studies show, and we absolutely recognize that filing reports or making complaints or discussing these situations publicly can have a cost to the person that's doing this. And I think collectively, if more people stand up, and there's less the individual that's standing up and saying, this happened to me, it needs to stop. It's like when the Me Too movement first came out on social media, and a lot of people were posting the hashtag Me Too, sometimes with explanation and sometimes without. It was a shock to everybody that so many people were standing up and saying something. So it is a courageous and it is a difficult thing to do. And sometimes there's a very high price to pay and a high cost, and there shouldn't be. But we can't make that go away, that part of it sometimes, because there are retributions. And make sure there's no non-disclosure agreements within your company that you're crossing, because then that's a real legal venue that you've entered into and can have a high risk. And I've got to say that in Australia, when the Human Rights Commission had their study and they asked large companies to let workers that had signed an NDA talk to the commission about their experiences and answer these surveys. BHP was one of the companies in Australia that stood up and said workers are free to talk about what happens to them. Maybe just in that circumstance, I don't know, but it was a really big deal that they did that.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And I think one of the tools and one of the ideas that stand out to kind of break this cycle that exists in certain companies, at least, is be more involved allies and speak up from a neutral position, because you have less chances of being labeled. And I have the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, that just the sheer number of people who from neutral positions express their opinion on a certain behavior that they've seen, the more chances there are of that behavior stopping.
Yeah, being able to go within your company and have this discussion, absolutely. That and outside, you know, people don't realize sometimes that their behavior is inappropriate or what they're doing isn't okay, or and so having people stand up and say, stop touching my arm every time you come talk to me. It's not okay. And then the more people realize, oh, right, you know, physical contact is everybody's right to say no to. And you shouldn't just assume you can go up and, you know, I was at a conference standing there talking to a group of women, and this man came up, he knew one of the women, and he was sort of had his hand on my back and he was rubbing my back. And I was just like, why are you turned to him? Why are you doing that? Stop. And he was so shocked. And I saw him stand in another group, and that's exactly what he did. And I saw her turn, and so hopefully it has an impact, and this person will realize they have no free license to go around touching people like that.
And again, related to this concept that you mentioned at the very beginning of everyone having their own backpack, and you never know what that person has been through or what that person is going through right now. So it is very important to be respectful of people's boundaries, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a question from Stephen here, who a very concrete example. So how does hugging fit in? I guess this is a pre-COVID and post-COVID question. How does hugging fit into a professional workplace? Is it to be discouraged?
It's a tough one because everybody's different, and you know, you may work together for just a few months or, you know, years, or ask. The biggest thing that I can say, don't assume. And particularly, you know, culturally in some places, it's just the way that people greet each other. But I think as there's this development of personal space, and post-COVID, of course, everybody's going to be a little bit different from now on. But you have to respect people's bodies and their personal space. And if you want to give them a hug, just ask. If they say no, then shake hands, touch elbows, whatever. But never assume is really my biggest piece of advice on that one.
Thank you. I have an interesting one that was posted earlier. I just haven't seen it. I'm sorry. Also, for all attendees, the reason why you are not seeing the questions is we actually set up the Zoom that way because this is a sensitive webinar, and therefore we didn't want to have questions exposed to the whole group, just in case someone wanted to ask it anonymously and didn't program Zoom appropriately. So the panelists can all see the questions, but as participants, you only see the ones that you ask. Your system is not broken. So I have a question from anonymous attendee, which is somewhat related to scenario one. So it starts with a statement. Inappropriate jokes and comments are pretty common in the geoscience. Especially so with younger colleagues or students. Anonymous attendee saying, I often try to address these issues politely and respectfully when I encounter them. However, as the geosciences still is very much a male-dominated industry, I have found a lot of younger women individuals become participants in their own harassment. They have the feeling that if they're to become accepted or be in line for advancements, that they need to be one of the boys and be complicit with the behaviors, so they're seen as, you know, fun team players, part of the group. When I interrupt the behavior or try to have discussions privately with the individuals, either the harasser or those being harassed, about why this behavior is wrong, etc., rather than an ally, I'm seen as the enemy. Are there any strategies or suggestions for approaching this type of situation?
It's a great question and a great, a lot of great observations in there. And I really congratulate you on a lot of your forward action in some of those situations. And it is, I read a lot about women that work in male dominated industries, even the Army, police force, security, first responders, things, occupations like that. And it is a very common type of reaction, is to adapt that more masculine to they're not participating in the harassment, because typically they won't see it like that. They'll see the joke, they'll see the humor of it, and go along with the joke that's happening. And they may just be covering, of course, maybe it's hitting some points at some, sometimes. So there is no one answer to any of these questions or observations, because everybody is different. Everybody's reacting differently. And I can say I can change how I feel or how I react depending on the day or the situation or the environment that I'm in too. But women do tend to cover up their femininity and, try and adapt a bit more of a masculine behavior and imagery. So it's really important to honor yourself and be yourself. This talk that I mentioned about being your authentic self and feeling okay with that. You don't have to adapt to all these different scenarios. And if you approach somebody and you offer them your hand and your help, and they're, no, thank you, I'm okay. Hopefully they don't really see you as an enemy, as opposed to just see somebody that you're trying to help them and offer your support. So don't stop, keep doing it. And if somebody says that they're okay, or, in that moment, they might be. And you just have to back away and just leave it as, well, if you ever do need help, if you ever want to talk about this, I'm available. And just leave yourself open to those scenarios, and don't get discouraged by not having somebody say, no, thank you.
Yeah, great. I have an interesting one here that just popped up. So from anonymous attendee again, they say, I work for a company with red and green behavior cards. So referring to the solution that you mentioned earlier. During our last behaviors training session, in front of the entire team, I was cut off while asking a question by the training leader, with her using a loud and aggressive tone. No one in the room spoke up. So behaviors cards and other visual tools only work if the company culture supports it. How do we change our inclusivity, equity, and diversity training sessions from being, a tick box token, and turn them into actual change culture-wise?
Yeah, that's unfortunate that even the trainer interrupted and wouldn't listen to your question, comment. And I would contact maybe the boss of that entity and say, say you had a pretty negative experience when you were trying to express something. There are so many different types of presentations and different companies and different presenters out there, and some of them, their hearts are in it, and others, absolutely, it's the great words on the website, it's the flavor of the day. So it's really important to find all sorts of different types of voices to bring into your company. And because no one presenter, no one topic, no one way of presenting this information is going to work for everybody. And everybody's going to be impacted by different presenters or different groups. So, just, have it on a more regular basis. It's not a once a year thing. It should be a continuous monthly, like you said, discussions in health and safety meetings, discussions before talks happen. Discussions after talks happen, but it should be a conversation, and there should be all sorts of different training opportunities, and not just one voice coming and explaining this kind of thing.
That makes sense. if we're promoting diversity.
Exactly.
I have a question here from Diana saying, how would you approach a sexist colleague, and how would you approach other people around you for support that do not necessarily see the condescending or inappropriate actions?
Yeah. Often it really is, there's no resolution to directly approaching somebody that has these attitudes already. And they are usually poking a weakness that they sense within you because they have that weakness within themselves. So yes, reaching out to your colleagues is probably going to be a more a positive experience. And just having as many conversations as you can, expressing the impact that this is having on you, finding those allies around you, and even going up the chain of command. If somebody is being sexist and inappropriate, take it up the chain of command. File a report if you can, write it down, and keep a record of how this person's behavior, when it's happening, how it's impacting you. And again, like I said, having this record, having this document of repeated incidents like that is, if you're at all comfortable talking to this person, showing them, sometimes they don't even realize, showing them this record. And that's, that could be a rare incident that's going to happen. It's better to take it to an HR or a supervisor, or file a complaint using it, or go talk to an employment lawyer.
Great, thank you. I have this other question from anonymous attendee, which saddens me a little bit, but that person is asking, how can a person know when to give up? My manager dismisses my concerns and empowers the person bullying me. Do I keep trying to fix the situation or leave my job to protect myself?
Those are really tough choices. Certainly some that I've had to face through my career. You have an asset and a power, and you have knowledge and you have skills. And if you're not getting the support, if you're not moving forward, if you're not learning anything from this person, even if you are, but it's costing you in your personal life, and it's impacting how you feel and your emotions, then it's important and it's okay to say, I need to take my skills and my knowledge and provide it somewhere else where I'm going to be supported. So you can try all of these things that we've talked about, or as many of them as you feel comfortable that we've talked about today, but there is always can be a point that you come to, and you need to look after yourself first. And if it's becoming too much, it's not fair, you've tried a bunch of things, you've maybe filed a report, then it is maybe time to look for a more supportive, a more professional work setting, and take your skills and take everything that's great about you and go someplace else.
Thanks, Susan. Maybe change it up with another question from another anonymous attendee. Maybe it's all the same person, I don't know. So this person wants to point out that they have seen a lot of change over time, that things are getting better, and people are becoming far more aware, and an important point, I think, willing to talk about these things. What's your take on it, Susan?
I do feel a positive movement. I think within running the Me Too, I continue to hear and be outreached about situations that are still happening. So I do think the conversation is growing. I do think people are feeling more comfortable. I think male allies are strengthening themselves and breaking the masculinity barriers around them to to step up and say to their coworkers, that's not okay. But I still hear so many stories and incidents of just the same things happening over and over again. So again, this perception that it is decreasing, I'm not sure. We are getting more vocal about it. The industry is starting to talk about it some more. Big companies are taking it on as a real issue. But don't assume, let's not assume that we're there yet. And keep going and really strengthen this conversation and really build up those male allies and female allies, and keep this discussion going, because there are still horrible things happening, and we need to really put a stop to as much of it as we can.
Great words. Maybe a comment that is somewhat related is from David, and this comment was posted quite early in the presentation. I think it was referring to maybe the third or second poll question that you posted, Susan, about have you witnessed harassment? And David is asking, is part of the reason men have not observed harassment or assault be due to the fact that the objectionable activities are one-to-one and isolated?
Absolutely. You know, it's not really the most common form of assault is usually, done away from other eyes being able to observe what's going on. Same thing with harassment, which is, you know, that comment of don't assume that it's not happening around you. Always assume that it's there. And, you know, I watched the Picture a Scientist movie, and there was one comment by the person who had done the behavioral, I think she was a neurologist, and she said, you know, believe the data, believe the studies. This is happening. Just because you don't see it, it's happening. The numbers are, you know, 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 women experiencing sexual assault and sexual harassment. It's not okay. It's happening to women around you and men around you. So it constantly needs vigilance.
So thank you. Still keeping on the male allyship topic. So a question from Alberto: apart from modeling good behavior, can you think of good strategies for promoting strong male allyship in undergrad geoscience education? He says, right away, I'm thinking that field programs are good vectors for this, but he's curious to know if you have other thoughts and ideas on this.
You know, right away, off the top of my head, I think that there is a really strong movement going on right now with positive masculinity groups that are out there. You know, here in Canada, we have a group called Next Gen Men, and they work as, you know, they've got group discussions, they've got book readings, and so seeking the support, maybe starting a chapter of a subgroup under a larger group like that within a university or a school to talk about positive masculinity and positive ways of supporting people around you in more healthier ways of expressing emotions and needs. And these are really important groups. And I think it's really fascinating that it's a real movement that's starting to come out. And again, there's lots of research on positive masculinity and how men are moving more towards, you know, less aggressive forms and more communicative forms, and just really exploring masculinity in positive ways. So find maybe one of these groups local to you, or even, you know, Next Gen Men, and join one of their reading groups or discussion groups. It's really amazing, some of the work that these groups are doing.
Great. I have, questions are coming in. Okay, so this one is quite personal from, again, anonymous attendee. If you come into a job with PTSD, would you have any recommendations about whether to inform your new employer or not, or colleagues, and if so, how?
Wow. That is such a personal journey through PTSD and through recovery from it. And, I think if you develop a really close relationship with somebody, you develop a friendship, or you start feeling uncomfortable and maybe you feel a trigger coming on, it's really important to have somebody to go to say, I'm not feeling really good right now. I think I need to just, remove myself and feel and comfort myself and look after myself. Or, maybe you need to take the day off, take the rest of the day off that day if you get triggered by something. But I don't think it's something that you need to, be so forward with, because sometimes there's regret for that kind of overexposure. But there's no one answer, unfortunately, to that kind of thing. You have to follow your own feelings and how strong you feel. But just, tread carefully with that kind of thing, because you want to be able to protect yourself and not feel that that you're being looked at differently because you have a challenge like that, whether it's PTSD or with anything. But there is that important piece about being your authentic self. And I think it's such a quiet epidemic out there. There's so much now that I've been through it. I see it in so many places and people that I had never expected to see it in. And we do reserve it for, the military and, again, first responder type people. And we forget that PTSD is the result of traumatic experiences. And it can be one or it can be several over a period of time. And I think women are the most underrepresented groups for PTSD sufferers that is not talked about, not recognized, and not given the help that they need to deal with this kind of suffering that's happening out there.
Yes, I agree. I also volunteer for the Canadian Ski Patrol, which is a volunteer organization, and we do deal with PTSD from a variety of sources, whether it's traumatic first aid experiences, but also aggressive behaviors from mountain guests towards patrollers. So it's, the diversity of sources of PTSD is definitely a thing. I have other personal questions from, again, anonymous attendees. And I'm going to start with one that is a bit controversial, and I think it's meant that way. And this is a safe space, so we're just asking away. This anonymous attendee is saying, I'm often told by my male counterparts that #MeToo has gone too far. I don't think it's gone too far enough. Just because we don't talk about being assaulted doesn't mean to say it's not happy ignorance is bliss kind of deal. It would be good if we could get some actual data on the mining industry. And also, he or she is pointing towards the fact that only 31% of the attendees to today's webinar are male, yet they make up to over 70% of the workforce. So I'm going to turn this comment into a question and ask you, Susan, do you think Me Too has gone too far? And in what way?
Personally, no, of course, I don't. I think the media is cashing in on it, as it were, has gone too far. It's too focused on very specific cases. I think the voices of the hundreds of thousands of people that #MeToo has been tsunamied by a lot of the press and the negative backlash that's happened. And it's not okay, because it is the voice of the majority of us that are out there that can #MeToo, have had experience with sexual assault or sexualized violence, and have the right to have a voice. because we've been quieted and we've been shamed and we've been closeted ourselves from the trauma, and to be able to come out and say. And so that's why I started at the beginning of the talk about redefining what Me Too is, and going to the Me Too movement's website. And they did put on a series of online, I think it was about 8 sort of episodes, and they're available online to watch for different stages of recovery, different support aspects of recovery from sexual assault. And they're really empowering to watch. And that's what Me Too is about. It's, like I said, it's about finding this community, finding this voice to say, Me Too, and letting people around us know, because we've been so quiet about it for so long. So I don't think it's gone too far. I don't think we've gone far enough, because there is this negativity associated with it now. And why is that there? And we need to break this culture. We need to break the rape culture that exists out there. And we need to offer more support and have more help available for people that struggle with the repercussions that have happened to them.
Sounds like communication is key, as usual.
Absolutely.
I have a personal question again from anonymous attendee saying, I work with a male who is definitely an ally, but it's clear he's one of the only ones in the company who holds that space. How can I support him in continuing to be this person, not just for me, but other women in our company, when I can see him getting discouraged?
I guess that discouragement must come from his colleagues. And there is a community that you need to build around these people and support them, and find maybe people outside of the company that he can connect with. Part of that allyship is creating community of other allies, so that you can share ideas and find support for each other. So there may be really strong allies in other companies that you can connect them with, if it's not within your own company, and just build that community around that person, so they don't get discouraged, and that they feel actually supported and strengthened to continue the support that they're showing other people.
Great.
Sorry, I'm just gonna definitely tell them, if you haven't, also, give them that support personally and say, I see you really helping me and other people, and I really appreciate it. And that, even that, can encourage them on.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Positive feedback goes a long ways. I have, okay, there's lots going on. Thank you everyone for participating. This is amazing. I feel like there are great questions out there, and diverse ones. So this one, again, from anonymous attendee, I train people to become part of the mining industry. For the industry, I want a diverse population represented at all levels, because that is the only way in which EDI issues, equity, diversity, and inclusivity, will eventually go away. But for my individual trainees, I do think about the personal costs that they may face in a career in the mining industry. Commonly, they have heard of those issues, but they, luckily, don't understand yet the impacts that they have on individuals' lives. Any tips about how to walk that line and how to approach this discussion?
Right, that's a little similar to maybe an earlier one, where
that's a question from Catherine.
We have to be honest and say these things happen, but building this community, building this strength. You don't want to send people out to situations that they don't have the skills to handle. I got to say that 90% of the experiences that I've had in mining are incredible and great. And I've traveled to 30 different countries and I've seen incredible things and met wonderful people. But it's a real slap in the face when these situations happen and you're just stunned and you're helpless and you don't know what to do and you freeze or you flee or you know. So it's great to, and developing this digger program, it's okay, you know, if these things happen, this is what you can do. And so it's education, that piece around making people aware these things can happen, but here's what you can do about it. And here's the people that you can reach out to if something does happen. You know, having that network. If, you know, I can't imagine the number of times as a consultant, I was just, you know, handed a plane ticket. I'm flying to this country. Oh yeah, you know, the company client says that there's going to be somebody there at the airport to pick you up, you know, and then that's it. That's sort of all you know. And I can't tell you the number of times I stood in an airport realizing that person that picked me up wasn't there yet. And there was no contingency plan in place as to, okay, but if nobody's there, go to this hotel, contact this, but you know, I wouldn't even have the phone number of the client. I'd have the email of my boss back in Vancouver at 3 a.m. saying, you know, look, there's nobody here to pick me up. Who's the client? You know, what's their phone number? How do I get a hold of them? So having, you know, being aware that these things happen and having contingencies and who to contact are so important. Building that network around every person that comes into this industry, so they have that outreach and they have someone to talk to.
Yes. Speaking of allies and resources, I invite all attendees to take a look at the chat. A couple things are going on, not the Q&A, but the chat. So the SEG has posted links to Next Gen Men, which is an association that Susan mentioned earlier. And there's also an SEG volunteer, and she posted a website which is called Champions of Change Coalition. I am not familiar with that, but I will definitely click on it as soon as we're done here. And last but not least, I want to mention to especially the person who asked the question about and shared his or her experience with PTSD, that there is someone out there for you who posted AVNI. They posted their experience of sexual assault and PTSD in this chat. And yeah, you're not alone, and there's a community out there. And so that person was kind enough to provide their advice, and I invite you to read through this. We have about 5 minutes left, so I will go. I'm sorry, I'm not answering all the questions, but I appreciate you guys sending them over. And so maybe one that's a bit forward-looking for future generations. We have Arnold Sarpong here, who is a fresh geoscience graduate with a brand new degree and has no experience and is passionate to work in the mining industry. He mentions that to get jobs, from what he understands, is that it's all about who you know and who you talk to. So if you ever end up in a situation where the person you know ended up working in a place where the workplace culture was not optimal, how do you, as a new fresh graduate, get to understand how to navigate these things?
Yeah, that's great question. One, you know, again, it's so hard to join, you know, student groups, early career groups for sure, and that can, again, this sense of community and this sense of network that you can start to build, it is so hard, and can feel overwhelming, and you can be so intimidated when you first start out. And, you know, I'd say go to these events, but sometimes you are that person standing in the room with all these senior people walking around you, which is why I say I always go up and try and talk to and pull in and introduce people around. But yeah, you know, building your own networks. There really isn't a venue or a repository of, you know, these kinds of stories. If you hear about a difficult or a challenging work site, then you go in prepared. If you're still willing to take that on and go in with skills and knowledge and you know, build a support network, whether it's still your family at that point or the friends that you went to university with, and keep those conversations open with them. But yeah, support and networking and trusting your instincts, trusting yourself is really important too.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. On that note, if I can make a little plug for the SEG, the Society of Economic Geologists. In terms of mentoring and networking, the Society has a lot of programs and options for you guys. So I encourage everyone who is new or established in the industry to take a look at the SEG website and see what the opportunities are to learn, but also maybe to mentor the future generation. So yeah, I think we're out of time, but I want to keep those last 2 minutes to give you a huge thank you, Susan, and the EEI committee of the SEG and the Early Career Committee of the SEG for organizing this. And thank you to all our attendees for sharing their stories and for asking very, very good questions. Up to you, Susan, for final words.
Okay, I do encourage anybody to go to our website if you're looking for resources. Like I said, right now it's very specific to Canada, but you can get some ideas of what's listed there that may be available to you in your country. If you're wanting to help, it really is helpful to have somebody sit down and come up with a similar list, say for the United States and Australia and countries in South America. Always consider talking to a lawyer. There's usually an hour or two of their time to provide advice and avenues of reporting that maybe you had not thought of. Like I said, it was a lawyer that told me about filing complaints with professional associations. We are hoping to start within the next month or two, maybe a monthly chat. Maybe it'll go to a weekly chat online to have exactly these kinds of discussions where, you know, again, building this sense of community and building this discussion and conversation. And so we're trying to come together for a venue for that kind of thing. And we will be at CIM. We will be at the SEG conference in whatever form that's going to take. And this is an incredible conversation that's happening in the chat. I'm just sort of trying to catch up with it and see some of it. But it's really encouraging that people are here, whether it's majority women because we're looking for advice. We face so many challenges, whether it's men who have faced challenges themselves. We are a male-dominated industry, and it's really important to remember that men are targeted by sexual assault and sexual harassment within our industry also, and we are inclusive of everybody who's had those experiences. And I look forward to connecting with any of you or as many of you as I can in the future. And I hope we've offered some help today.
Thanks, Susan, for your time. And for the audience, Me Too Mining, check it out. Thank you.
Thank you very much.